Welcome to the College Knowledge Podcast, sponsored by the College Planning Network and Paradigm Financial Group. Whether you're searching for that right fit college, applying to college, or figuring out how you're going to afford it all, you're in the right place. You'll hear from deans, admissions counselors, student athletes, and scholars from esteemed universities and colleges around the country. We'll dig deep to uncover their insight and unique experiences. So whether you're a student gearing up for college or a parent with college-bound kids, sit back, relax, and listen. Like you, we have lots of questions. Our guests have the answers, and we're excited to share them with you. Let's get started. If you didn't know, we're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn at Elite Collegiate Planning. Make sure to share and tag us.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of College Knowledge. I am your host today, Joe Kerins. Dave is out on a leadership conference, so I have the distinct pleasure of being with Ben Orwan. I think I got it right. Close, I think. Close. I'm sorry. But he's the owner of Real College Essays. Ben, thank you so much for being with us today. Looking forward to this conversation. I think that's going to be very knowledgeable, especially for a lot of our parents and seniors that are still writing those essays or critiquing them a little bit. So I think this is a great time of the year to have this discussion. Thanks for being on.
That's my pleasure. It definitely is busy season right now. Everyone is scrambling.
Yes, without a doubt. And I'm going to get to that. That's definitely going to be one of the questions about procrastination on the essay. And it's almost October. And is this too late? But we'll get there. So Ben, always want to know a little bit backstory about how you got to where you are. So walk us through your journey. Where did you go to college? What was your essay like? Did you realize throughout your time that, hey, maybe I could have done better? But what was your journey like to get to where you're at today? Actually,
it's kind of ironic because I'm originally from Australia. And so I never had to write a college essay to get into colleges. Okay. That system doesn't exist. It's purely based on grades. It's a very systematic process. But I did write an application essay to get into grad school. I went to UC and did my PhD in history. I was at the University of Chicago for my master's before that. So I spent most of my education and most of my life actually in the United States. Okay. And then I wrote a book, which was my dissertation, but it became a book. And that was quite a story. It was about how I was a history PhD student, and I basically discovered in German archives that Hollywood studios were corresponding with the Nazis in the 1930s and actually doing business with Nazi Germany. And I found that Hollywood was actually selling hundreds of movies to the Nazis all through the 1930s. This wasn't really known, or at least the scale of the interaction between the Hollywood studio heads and the Nazis wasn't known. And so I set out to uncover everything I could find in the archives to retell the story of what the relationship was between Hollywood and the Nazis in the 1930s. There are other stories about other companies that did business with the Nazis, like Ford, General Motors, but Hollywood had not come up. So I thought it was a really exciting journey for me to do that because it was pure discovery. I had to really refresh my German, and I went to the archives day after day for years and got to tell this story. And I sort of related in my mind to what I'm doing these days, because writing a story like that, telling a story that isn't told, something that gets people's attention, is really what you need to do when you write a college essay. Because college admissions officers, it's hard to overestimate. They are looking at so many applications and they don't have very long. You really can grab the reader. If someone is reading hundreds of applications and then they come across one that just looks a bit different from the others, it really makes a big impact. And it can be done, but it's very hard. And so I connect those two things. I was always interested in trying to grab the reader, grab an audience, get people's attention. Not for the sake of it. I wanted to tell something that was very important. But if you really do that work and you tell a story that is important and interesting, people are going to pay attention. And so that's the connection. That's how I see it anyway.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, we could go through a whole, I think another episode about what you just mentioned, because I always, I've told many people, especially my youngest brother, that history is written by those that won. And meaning, what you know and what you read can be, a lot of things can be hidden, and it's kind of the people that win are the ones who decide on what actually gets published and things like that. And so I could go on and on about what you wrote about. You already see, you got it. There you go. Like that's that you grabbed me. I'm like, all right, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole just yet, because we're not here to talk about it, but very interesting. And then, so I'm just interested. So so your undergrad was in Australia and then you came to the US after that?
My undergrad was at the University of Sydney in Australia. My junior year was at UC Berkeley.
Okay.
It was one of the early exchange programs. And I took all these graduate seminars. I was precocious and I took all these classes that were way more advanced than what I was meant to be taking. I made some connections to professors and I realized I really wanted to get a PhD. Yeah. Ended up applying and then moving to the US for grad school. So I'm really way more familiar with the US educational system at this point. But I did 3 years in Australia before I moved here.
Got it. Okay. I was going to ask how different is the education system, but I don't know. At least nowadays, I don't know if we could speak to it or not. But
yeah, they're very different. I mean, and also my experience is specific. I went to Berkeley, and I'm a big fan of Berkeley. I think I got an incredible education. I think it's an incredible university. There was nothing like that in Australia. That just doesn't exist. But of course, Berkeley isn't representative of all universities in the United States. So my experience is specific.
Yeah. And then you were at Chicago, correct?
I was at Chicago for 1 year. I got my master's in film studies at the University of Chicago. Yeah, that was great too.
And, differences between those universities. What were some of the things that stood out to you?
There are a lot of differences between those.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, the weather is the big one.
Okay.
My memories of the University of Chicago were sitting in Regenstein Library, absolutely freezing outside. You couldn't go outside. And it was, there were these kind of cafeterias inside the library you could eat inside. A lot of friends. It was a really great bonding time. But my memories of Berkeley are sitting out on the grass in the sunshine, reading, going to plays. It's a much more laid back atmosphere, but they're both very serious schools. Even though Berkeley's laid back, they're very serious. So they're very different. I think my year at Chicago was the most intense year in terms of just getting work done. It was a very intense place.
So, I mean, the story you kind of, you're telling me again, history, it's kind of the story we typically would hear if somebody goes to become a professor. You started writing. So when did the switch happen? I mean, is that the direction that you were originally planning on going, was to more teach, or was it always writing? And how does all of a sudden, you're studying history lead to guidance on college essays? How did that come about?
Yeah, I always loved working individually with students. So I taught a class on Hollywood, but it was a class for history seniors who were writing their senior theses. So I met with them as a group, but mostly that was me advising one-on-one, studying their theses. And over the course of a few years, I advised 30 students, which is quite a lot. And I found that one-on-one work was really rewarding for me. I would say I don't think I knew what I wanted to do when I first set out.
All right.
I love writing, and I discovered as soon as I started at Berkeley that I love teaching. Okay. And I loved that combination. I sort of established a kind of routine where I would wake up and write, all morning and early afternoon, and then I would teach after that. And I did that all through my PhD. That was how I wrote my PhD, which became my book. And those two things kind of worked together. And it was just a great, very rewarding kind of routine. I would write, and that, was like me exercising one muscle, and then I would teach, and it was the other. And I guess I was never that interested in the side of academia, the administrative side of academia. Okay. That doesn't play to my strengths.
Yeah.
Sitting on committees and determining, policies of universities. That wasn't what I wanted to do. But I really do, like, first and foremost, I'd say I'm a writer, and I value having time for that. So I love I still write every morning, and I'm still working on projects. I'm working on my next book. And I spend, a full day teaching after that.
Nice.
So in a way, there's a lot of continuity there, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. When was the first time that you helped somebody specifically with a college application essay? Yeah.
That I started doing it in 2016.
Okay.
I didn't set out to, I was doing some tutoring, and I had some clients, and one of them was applying to college. I started working with him when he was a junior. Then when he was a senior, he was applying to college. And I realized that was way more fulfilling for me than just regular tutoring. And so then I started specializing in that pretty soon.
Got it. Yeah. All right. And then real college essays, when did that become established?
So that is only this past year.
Okay.
I'm doing it, for 6 or 7 years now, but I decided at a certain point that it was time to put my policy down, my philosophy of college essays, because I find that the way I approach it is pretty different from other people.
Okay.
And I thought it was time to formalize that and create.
Right.
So, yeah.
And when you're talking about, maybe something that's a little bit different, what do you mean? What practices or what is it that you're just, talking about there that does you look at things a little bit differently than everyone else? What is it that makes you stand out?
Well, I think one of the most dangerous things students can do when they're applying to college is to read collections of essays that worked, which are all over the internet. Or, sometimes they're books, sometimes they're blogs, sometimes people post them on TikTok, whatever.
Sure.
That's the usual way people approach college essays, including a lot of people who try to, help you with college essays.
Sure. Yeah.
I find that approach to be really dangerous for students, because what they do, first, they're already extremely anxious about the whole college teaching process. And second, no US high school senior, or virtually no US high school senior, has written a personal essay before. They've written analytical essays. That's the education you receive. Again, this was different in Australia. We did write personal. In the US, no one has. So suddenly you have to write this all-important essay, and it has to be a personal essay. You've never done that before. You're extremely anxious. Everyone's telling you this is going to determine the rest of your life. And people go and read these essays, and they're like, oh, I have to copy this. Which is the exact worst thing you can do. Because if college admissions officers are looking for something that, strikes them as a bit different, that captures their attention, the last thing they want to read is what everyone else has written before.
Right. Sure.
If you read those kinds of essays, I think what happens, a couple of things happen, but the main thing is everyone thinks you have to write something really clever. You need something that just sounds clever and is written in a sort of creative way. But I don't think the way most high schoolers end up writing it is that creative. It's what they think is creative.
Sure.
And they just want like a gimmick or something catchy that they think will capture admissions officers' attention. But I think when admissions officers see that stuff, they kind of roll their eyes or groan because they've seen it so many times. And my approach is not to tell you to look at what everyone else has done. I believe every single person out there has a story that they can tell, that is a unique story that can grab people's attention. I don't think they've been given the skills to work out, to identify the story, to work out how to structure that story. But if they do get those skills, they can tell their own story, and it's going to be way more impactful than copying anyone else.
So I know if Dave was here, he always quotes that the best college essay he ever read, the first words were, "I remember the first time I held a human brain." And then it went into this student's story about why they want to become a neurosurgeon. And and it was because of a younger sibling that had issues, and really, but again, told a great story. I still remember again, I'm not in the admissions side, but one of my favorites, and when you first read the title, you're going, you might not want to do this, but it turned out that it told a great story, was how Madden football saved my life. And it was a student with Asperger's that had trouble socializing and turned this video game into the way that he was able to interact with others, but then started a club at school, became the president, created a charitable organization to okay, so here's a video and here's what I did with it. Here's my story, how I became a leader and how I attracted other people to, have a goal in mind with. I was like, hey, this jumps out the page for me, Yeah. So again, I mean, those are the one that always sticks out to me. I know that's the one that always sticks out to Dave.
I think the reason they stick out to you, the first one has a good hook. The first sentence stands out, grabs your attention. But both of those essays, I think, stand out to you because first, they do a good job at it, but more importantly, they're authentic. They're not trying to be someone they're not.
Correct.
Talking about his dream of being a brain surgeon,
Right.
That maybe he won't be a brain surgeon, who knows? But he definitely believes that he wants to do that right now. And that is a much better approach than coming up with something that you think is what other people want to hear.
Yeah.
You can't think of what other people want to hear. You have to think about your journey, your experience. And that isn't as easy as it sounds. Some people know what they want to be, but I'd say most people don't. The people who know what they want to be, it's a bit easier to work out. You know what the essay is going to be about. Still, just because you know what you want to be doesn't mean you've thought about it in any...
Sure.
So you still have to be able to explain. It doesn't really matter what the topic is if you demonstrate that you've thought about it and you have some interesting take on it. But it does have to be authentic.
And that's one thing that I've always tried. And again, I'm not an expert in this area, but I've always used the definition of fluff. Right? You're creating this essay that is not genuine. You're filling it with fluff that you think someone else wants to read. And the advice that I've given, I would say it's free advice. And I started to give this before I really became interactive with the College Planning Network. I said, parents, take your child's essay, go to work, a coworker that doesn't really know who your child is, right? And ask them, hey, can you take 5 minutes to read this and then tell me who you think, what do you think of the person? And if who they read back is not your child, because you know them, then you know that it was filled with fluff. They were right. It wasn't genuine. If they come back and they give you their response on who they think wrote this essay and what they're like, and you're like, man, that's my kid. They probably nailed it. Probably some critiques still, but it's kind of like, go through that exercise of writing an essay, give it to a stranger, and then get their feedback, which is kind of what the process almost is. Now you're dealing with an admissions officer, not a stranger, a little bit different.
A little bit, but no, I mean, someone who reads it and thinks about it and who has nothing to do with it is going to be able to give their opinion.
Right.
It's usually going to be correct. I would say just as often as, because you mentioned sometimes you'll read it and it doesn't sound like your kid. I think often an even bigger problem and a more common problem is I read an essay and I don't hear anyone in the essay. I don't have a sense of who the person is.
Sure.
And it's because they're using a lot of clichés and saying things that they've heard. And they don't realize that then they just need to be themselves.
Yeah.
But they're not really being anyone because they're sort of writing. And
true.
It's fluff. But it's the number of times I've heard certain expressions in essays. And on top of that, often what people will do is they won't actually tell you what their experience is. They'll just start interpreting their experience,
right?
Without saying what it was. And so they'll say something like, I grew more than I ever grew before, and I realized I was going to be okay. Students will say that, but they won't say what actually happened before that. So you don't get a sense of who the person is if they actually describe what they went through. Sometimes the more basic stuff of just telling us what your experience was, that's gold if you can actually, but people think, oh, that's not what I meant to be doing. So,
right. And as far, how much thought has to go into this? And, I alluded to this earlier that, it's crunch time and this is when a lot of stress comes out. There has to be a lot of thought, preparation, we try to help kids kind of saying, hey, as early as freshman year, like it's almost like this diary, like what happened this past year, what happened in the summer, what happened in the school year, because you might use some of that in an essay. But in your world, how early do you think is appropriate to really start drafting and really, get into the college essay process? How late is too late? How early is too early? What's your experience with that?
Yeah, we're right on the cusp right now, I would say. So it's, it's about, mid-September. If you're applying early to places, that's going to be November 1. That gives you 6 weeks to write your Common App essay and also a supplemental for each school that you're applying to. You can do it. It's not, I don't recommend it. This is how I put it to my students or to people I speak to. You've spent 4 years on you. If you think about what admissions officers look at when you apply, they look at your GPA, they look at your SAT or ACT, and those would be the most important things. And then they'll look at your essay, which is not quite at that level, but still important. But those would be the 3 main things that admissions officers are looking at. Now, you spend 4 years on your GPA. You spend probably 6 months working on your SAT. That would probably be average for people really serious about it. You get tutoring, you take courses, you take so many practice tests. And then the essay, it comes to September and it's like, oh, I'll just write my Common App essay now. It's not a good idea because it's a third of your application. Maybe not quite a third, but close to a third. And you're treating it as an afterthought. So I think that's a huge mistake. And I think the essay is even if it isn't as important as your GPA and SAT, it's the underestimated part of the application. And if you want to make the most difference to your chances, it is worth working on that essay really hard. I think if you start thinking about it in the summer before, that's fine. That'll give you enough time. But I think I'm going to be getting calls all through October. I mean, I get calls every day from people telling me, can you meet today? It's June, and, I can't do that because I have other students, but you're not doing yourself any favors if you approach it that way. You don't need to be crazy about it, but you do need to start thinking about it, I think, in the summer before.
And, you talk about GPA, SAT, essay. Well, 2020 comes, COVID hits, and now the SAT becomes optional. And now a lot of schools have not gone back to having it being required. And so almost every admissions officer that we've talked to said, well, if you don't submit your SAT score, we're just going to weight everything else, accordingly. Like, hey, if that made up 50%, we've got 50%. We now have to spread out. Well, the essay is obviously a big factor because even a GPA, GPA at one school might not be the same. It might be the same number as another school, but the course rigor, the school's history, it might not hold as much weight. Whereas the SAT was kind of like, hey, it's for everybody. Like, I can gauge certain things off of different students based on this score. And so have you seen any changes, in your world? Have you been surprised in the past few years with applicants and, hey, having a strong essay maybe has better outcomes? Have you seen any of that happen in the past few years?
I definitely have. I have a student who got rejected early from Barnard and didn't have a good Common App essay, and then came to me and we worked on a completely different Common App essay. And the next thing she knew, she was waitlisted at Harvard. She didn't get in, but to get waitlisted at Harvard is not an easy feat. And nothing was different about her application other than the essay. So I have seen things like that happen. I'm curious to see how it evolves in the next few years. But I do definitely see a major impact on students' applications when they write a good essay.
And can we agree that an essay right now shouldn't be about your experience with COVID?
Oh, well, there's a COVID essay that you can talk about that's optional in the Common App. You could mention it if it plays a part. It should not be, your essay can't be about COVID, obviously. That is not going to work for anyone. But if COVID plays a part in your story,
sure,
mention it. Maybe it made something worse. Maybe it made something that you're struggling with impossible. That's fine. But you need to write about something that makes you different. And you write about COVID, again, it goes back to my original point. You're writing about what makes you just like everyone else.
Here at Elite Collegiate Planning, we're able to send students to private schools for nearly a fraction of the cost of public schools. Visit our website, elitecollegiateplanning.com, to learn more.
Sure. Yeah, and I was just joking because when you were speaking of that, it was, I forget who we spoke with, Niall, but this was last year or 2 years ago. I wish I remember, but it was an admissions officer, and he said, please do not write an essay about your experience with COVID. Everyone struggled with it. You are not making yourself look any different if that's what you're writing about, which goes home. You want to stand out. You want to jump off the page. You want to be different. You really want to show. So I think the other thing that, and I'm curious about your take on this, because I've had differences of opinion from some different people that are in admissions processes where there are sometimes students make a mistake in their essay that they're trying to be the jack of all trades. They're trying to check so many boxes to kind of show I could be everything. And then there's other students, this is who I am, take it or leave it. Either, I put on the paper, this is who I am. And the school looks at that and says, you're a great fit for this school or you're not. But students are sometimes afraid with that. And I've heard differences from admissions officers because sometimes they are looking for that student that might check multiple boxes. And other times they are looking for that person that's very direct to the point. Essentially what jumps out is, this is who I am. Do you want me? And I'm just curious about those because, again, I don't accept students. That's not my role. But I know that there definitely can be some downsides to, again, trying to put on paper something you're not, but you're trying to check boxes. Again, not that genuine essay. But how do you look at that? Do you want to try and basically say, this is who I am? Or is there some strategy with, kind of portraying yourself as something that is someone who is adaptable or, kind of, is there any?
Yeah, I definitely think the answer is that you should say who you are and you shouldn't be trying to check boxes.
Okay.
Students who check boxes and write essays that have a lot of show all these different things that they do, they will get into top schools. But I don't believe they're getting into top schools on the basis of their essays. I think they get into top schools on the basis of their SAT and GPA.
Got it.
If you have a perfect SAT and an amazing GPA, and you have a long list of extracurricular activities, and you're doing all sorts of things that demonstrate that you are really going to get somewhere, well, you get into top schools. You might not write a very good essay. I think to write a good essay, you need to have a point. You can't just say you do everything. And this actually, you reminded me of something I've noticed, and I don't know if other people have brought this up. I actually think often that top students have more trouble with the essay than regular students. And I think the reason is because they're trying to show off everything they've done. They're trying to list all their achievements. And they're missing the point of writing a college essay. Right. And they're so used to sort of this spirit of accomplishment. They make their essay about that. And that isn't what impresses anyone when you read an essay. I think the point of the essay is to write, and I think admissions officers would have to agree, the point is to write something that is different from what you see in the rest of the application. You don't need to reiterate all your extracurricular activities. That's in the application. You don't need to boast about what great grades you've gotten all through high school. That's already in the application. You can write really anything, but if you can demonstrate, if you can do it well, that's then going to be a really important part of your application. So I think the answer is pretty clear. I don't think if you cover a whole lot of ground, you're putting your best foot forward in the essay. I think you need to stand out on the page. And I think very often when you look at students who got into, say, Harvard, and you say, look at the essay that got them into Harvard, it wasn't the essay that got them into Harvard.
Right. Yeah.
It was their SAT and GPA.
Got it. So I know students always struggle with what should I write about? And I think sometimes the struggle with those students that are phenomenal students, right, is it's the simple fact that they are hard workers, right? And they study and they put in the time. And look, some of them can be gifted and things come naturally. And, it's to them, it's not necessarily always that there was some type of adversity that they had to overcome to get these great grades.
Yes.
They didn't push themselves, too hard, or even if they tried to push themselves, things just worked out because of their work ethic. And so sometimes they struggle with, well, what do I write about? Like, I did good in school. I worked really hard. There wasn't this life-changing adversity I had to overcome. What the heck could I write about? I know that the narrative and the ideas of how to put yourself on page is never easy for anyone. But what if you have somebody that feels like they're vanilla? They don't have that story that could make them jump off the page. I'm sure that everybody could figure it out if they put the time in, right, on how to make themselves jump. But I think that's part of the thing that some of those students with great grades essentially do struggle with. So how do you help students try to figure out like the narrative of what they should be writing as their essay? Is there any exercise you essentially take them through before pen even meets paper?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's not an exercise. The early sessions when I meet with a student, we're not doing any writing. If we're doing writing early on, then something's wrong.
Okay.
You have to think before you write. So the early sessions are back and forth. I'm asking questions. I don't have a set of questions. I really go by instinct and just ask the student when they say something interesting, then I push them in that direction. What I always do is I'll start by asking if they've had any significant challenge that is unusual, that isn't what everyone experiences. And probably about 30 to 40%, maybe 40% will have something. And that will probably be what they're going to write their essay on. So they'll answer prompt 2 of the Common App, and they'll talk about a challenge, how they overcame it, what steps they took, how it affected them, and what they learned from the process. That's sort of an obvious place to go. Some students will have a challenge and they won't want to talk about it, and that's perfectly fine. But about, like I say, 30 to 40% will go in that direction. That leaves the rest.
Yeah.
What I always ask is the impossible question, which is, okay, you haven't had a challenge, an unusual challenge in your life, but what about your life is unusual? It can be good, it can be bad, it can be neutral, just something that isn't what everyone else has experienced. And sometimes that leads to an immediate answer. Sometimes it takes an hour. But we just start talking and brainstorming, and I push them when I hear the spark of something. So, for example, I have a student this year. He's had a perfectly great upbringing. He has had no challenges, really. He does great in school, has lots of friends, well-adjusted kid. And we just started talking. And I said, well, what do you like doing? And he said, well, I'm a musician. And I said, well, what kind of music do you play? He says, I play violin in an orchestra. Nothing that unusual. Many students play violin in an orchestra. And I was like, well, let's just talk about your music for a while. And we started talking, and he said, yeah, he paused. And when they pause, you know that they're thinking. And
sure.
Long silence. And he said, when I go to the movies, I love soundtracks, and I love listening to soundtracks of movies. I love old soundtracks, but what I really love are new soundtracks where you hear motifs for different characters. And I've actually noticed that when I go to the movies, I can close my eyes and I can imagine what's happening just by listening to the soundtrack. And I can actually work out the plot by listening to movies. And so basically what he's saying is he doesn't watch movies, he listens to them.
Yeah.
Super interesting. And I said, well, why do you think you do that? And he said, well, I think I just notice things sometimes that other people don't notice because it's more interesting. And eventually we realized this connects to his whole learning style.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. And yeah, that's not a challenge that he's experienced. Sure. It's not a challenge at all. It's just something that's a bit different that led us into his character.
Yeah.
It took a lot of work. We had to talk for multiple sessions before we really worked it out.
Sure.
And then rewriting the essay, it took some time.
Yeah.
But by the end, he's got a tremendous essay on his hands because no one says, I don't watch movies, I listen to them.
Right. Yeah.
No one says that. So
now,
it grabs you.
Yeah. And with that now, is he a student that is looking to pursue music? Is that important with that?
Not at all. No, I don't think you need to. No, he's looking into STEM. Doesn't matter.
Okay. Yeah.
He's making an impact on the page. His essay is distinctive. And, he's got great grades. He's got test scores, but his essay will make him stand out. You don't.
Sure.
If you can connect that to a future career in a way that isn't hacky, if you're doing it anyone is going to be able to see from a mile off that you're just trying to connect something, obviously. If you can't, you shouldn't do it. You should just present an essay that describes something about you that's unusual, that grabs the reader's attention. I think that's going to make the biggest difference in eventual admissions decisions because it's like the equivalent of getting a perfect SAT. You've submitted a really good essay, and no amount of strategizing is as important as just putting in a good essay. I'd also say one other thing, and I think this relates to what I was saying earlier about how top students often have trouble with the essay. I think the essay draws on a totally different skill set to any other part of the application. So if you want to improve your SAT, just take 100 tests. You will improve the SAT. If you want to improve your GPA, just work really hard at school and your grades will start to go up. You would think for the essay, you just have to work really, really, really hard. But and you do have to work hard, but not in the same way. Sure. I think you have to stop and you have to take a breath and you have to reflect on your life. Storytelling doesn't work with just like intensity and hard work. You have to pause and reflect and be open. And so it really requires a completely different skill set to every other part of the application.
Yeah.
Which I find fascinating. That's why I enjoy doing this.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think that, the big piece that has jumped out to me just with that story about, I listen to movies, I don't watch them. Well, again, if you're writing an essay that has essentially, here's my standout, here's my brag sheet with all my accomplishments, here's my GPA, here's my SAT score, here's everything else on the, extracurriculars. I want to talk about something that you don't see over there and tells me about who they are. And now if you're going to go study STEM. Well, I think you look at that and you say, well, this is a this is a student, a young man who kind of like looks at the world a little bit differently.
Exactly.
That might be an interesting person to bring in, especially if they're isn't that what science potentially is all about? Like when you talk about the different STEM fields, it's not always that you got to follow. No, you kind of want to be someone that sees things in a little bit of a different way. And that was a perfect way of establishing that. Like, I think that jumps off the page. And again, I'm not in that industry, but it definitely makes you unique. You're okay. Wait, I listen to movies. I don't watch them.
Yeah.
Well, does that have anything to do with me studying in STEM? No, but it shows the way I think might be different than everybody else. Well, bang, did it. A job accomplished,
Well, it reminds me of my advisor at UC Berkeley who said, that because I value imagination. And he saw me as imaginative. And he said, despite the fact that he studied African-American history, very rigorous, very analytical approach, he said, the most important quality in a historian is imagination. It's not what you would think, but it's the same as perception in a scientist or imagination in a scientist. Someone who sees the world a bit differently, who notices things that other people don't notice. They might ask questions that lead them to discover something that otherwise no one else would have discovered.
Sure.
Someone looks at the world a bit differently. Of course, you need someone to have, the skills in their field of science, but there's something a bit beyond that leads to, true achievement and true discovery. And I think people recognize that.
So one of the questions I want to ask, obviously we've covered a lot of things, that mistakes that have happened and some really good examples, but I wanted to go back to the example you brought up about the student that didn't get into Barnard and then got waitlisted at Harvard, and you helped change the essay. Mm-hmm. What were some of the things that it was just too generic to begin with, and you helped really reach that standout, make it more personal, make it more unique? What essentially did you help that student with? And how can parents take that as kind of a lesson learned on, hey, this was one student, same GPA, same application, result A, result B, something changed in there. What did you help guide them with that also parents could potentially say, hey, this is something I might have to take notes on?
That was a completely different type of student. She had a father who died quite young and was quite a well-known doctor in the area. I can't remember the specialty. And he treated patients from all income levels. And when he died, there were, hundreds of people at his funeral. But she grew up kind of in his shadow. She'd been told, she knew about him when she was very young. She'd met, but he died when she was quite young. And she knew she wanted to be a doctor. Mm-hmm. She'd written a generic essay about wanting to be a doctor. And as soon as I met her, I started asking her, about her father, and she teared up. And she hadn't really gone there in her essay. Yeah. She didn't feel comfortable talking about her feelings about her father, her feelings about why she wanted to go into medicine and how deep that went. And as a result, when she'd written an essay, she'd written some generic stuff about always wanting to be a doctor, but she hadn't gone there. She hadn't talked about the difficult stuff. So we spent at least 2 sessions just talking about what her experience was. And it was a really interesting story. And I understood how her father had made this deep impression on her, and how she'd sort of seen her life path from a very young age. And she's very sensitive and really knew she wanted to do that, but hadn't gotten in touch with the feelings. So we got in touch with the feelings. But then once we got in touch with the feelings and worked out what she actually thought about all this and felt about all this, then we had to put it on the page. So I think in my role is sometimes it's almost like a therapist. It's bringing out someone's experience and feelings, but it's not like a therapist in the sense I'm not treating anyone. I'm just trying to get the story out. Mm-hmm. Then I become a writing coach and help them get that story out. Mm-hmm. I think it's really gratifying for students, for her, for example, to finally be able to get that out, put it on the page, submit it with their college application, and own their narrative and say, this is who I am. So that is a different kind of challenge. That's someone who has an obvious challenge that they've grown up with. Yeah. They find it challenging even getting out the words. And then my job is really to tease it out gently, bring in gentle approach, patient approach. And so that was what was required there. And then it obviously made a big difference for her.
So we've kind of discussed the narrative a little bit, trying to figure out what to write about. Then it comes time to actually write. Mm-hmm. And this is where the art of storytelling comes in. Should there be a specific type of build, with a hook? Again, because you're limited in how many words you get to write, and it was funny. I did have a student. I forget the essay they had to write was limited to 2,000 words. Does that sound right? That number?
No, that's way too long. It's, the 650.
650. Oh, that's what it was. Her essay was 2,000.
Oh, I see.
And that was like, hey, we're ready to go. And then it comes out, and she's like, I got it. And kind of thought she cut it down, and she was still over like 1,200. She's like, I thought I cut this thing. So obviously you have a finite amount of words. Mm-hmm. Is there a set structure that you typically would use into kind of, is it always kind of the same structure that makes a good essay? Is it always different? How do you look at the actual writing of that?
I would say, so there's no set structure. You can't impose a structure.
Perfect answer.
It doesn't work. Writing doesn't work like that. Storytelling does.
Perfect.
A hook. If you can have a good hook, that's good. Mm-hmm. If you don't have a good hook, that might be perfectly fine.
Okay.
I think the most important thing is that this is about storytelling. People don't have much experience with storytelling, but the most important thing is that you're not giving a portrayal of yourself that's static. You can't just say, I want to be a doctor, and here are 7 reasons why I want to be a doctor. Mm-hmm. That won't work because that's not a story. That's a list. A story has to have change. Mm-hmm. And so to write a personal statement or that's about yourself, you need to show how you have changed over the course of time. And so you need to start in one place and you need to end somewhere different. If you don't have that, it's not going to be a good essay. So that is critical. Mm-hmm. If you look at the prompts, they're all asking you, how did you change? How did you grow from the experience? So you want to start usually with some kind of event. Mm-hmm. Maybe as a hook, maybe as the whole point of your essay. Mm-hmm. And you want to describe a problem, and you want to describe how you worked on a problem, and you want to describe how that led to change. There may be some cases where you don't follow a narrative of personal growth.
Sure.
But you definitely need change. You need the story to start somewhere and go somewhere else. It's like a movie. Mm-hmm. If there's no conflict, if there's no problem established early on, no one is going to keep watching the movie. It's boring. Yeah. So that is critical. A sense of movement, a sense of development, a sense of change, and your recognition that change has happened. And then I guess one other thing I'd say is you do need to tell a story to get the reader interested. Mm-hmm. You need to, often it's a hook to just describe an event that was really important to you. But you need to achieve a balance between storytelling and then analysis. Mm-hmm. So you need to describe something that was important, but you also need to reflect and demonstrate that you've thought about it and been mature and process the experience. And that isn't more storytelling. You can't just tell a story the whole way. You need to stop and reflect. So I'd say those are I know they sound general maybe, and they're not that helpful, but a sense of development and a balance of storytelling and analysis, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's extremely helpful, kind of how you're describing it. I think hopefully parents that are struggling with this time of the year, and like you said, we got 6 weeks left, and they might hear this and go, look at that child's essay and go, all right, let's start from scratch here. Let's go. I think it's great information, which leads me to real college essays. So is it just you? Do you have a staff? Do you have other people that guide families? Catch me up on the business aspect of how you're working right now.
So I've just started the business this year.
And so when clients come to you, do you offer different levels of service? Is it, hey, an essay critique? Is it that you sit down with everybody? What is the process of, hey, if I have a junior right now, my kids are all younger. My oldest is in 5th grade, but if I'm coming up and senior and I'm looking for help with an essay, when would I reach out to you? When would be, how early do you take on clients? If I'm late to the game, do you have expedited services? What's kind of your business model on how you're helping families and students right now?
The vast majority of people are seniors applying. Mm-hmm. I do have a couple of juniors who just want to get started, and they're applying for other essays in writing competitions, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And so they're doing that to prepare for college essays. But most are seniors. I don't have fancy packages. Basically what we do is we have a 20-hour package, we have a 30-hour package in case people want that, or we will just do it hourly. Okay. But my reason for that is that there's so much variety in terms of what students need. Some students come to me, I'll admit it's very rare. A couple of students have come to me with near perfect Common App essays. That's very rare. But some are very good writers and only need, 3 or 4 or 5 sessions to have a decent Common App essay. I might need 10. Then there are the supplementals. So I prefer to just let me know how many hours they need. Most people go hourly just because of the but at a certain point, they might want to purchase a package, realizing they're going to need a certain number of hours. Usually find out, I think the best strategy, because I don't want people to buy what they don't need. So I'd rather they work with me for an hour or two, get a sense of how long they need. And it should be very clear after a few sessions how long they need.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. And if families are reaching out or want to get in touch with you, hopefully we're not going to put a bunch of, reaching out and, hey, I need an essay done in 2 weeks. But how can they get in touch with you?
Oh, well, realcollegeessays.com is the website. There's phone number, email, there's a web form. They can easily get in touch.
Fantastic.
And I'm still taking on new people.
Okay.
So at this point, that's going to change at a certain point. So I would say,
there's capacity always.
Kind of help. Yeah. It is getting chaotic, and there's a certain point, usually in October, where it's just impossible to take on anyone new.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This has been great. We covered a lot today. You gave a plethora of education and knowledge that we're constantly looking for. I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, man.
Anything else that you would, if you kind of have a general audience that we maybe didn't discuss, anything that would stick out that you wanted to make sure that families or students know about?
Yeah, one thing I guess I would say, this is going back to the college essay. I think I talked a lot about how you want to stand out on the page.
Mm-hmm.
And I think admissions officers are often used to hearing the same thing over and over again, the same kind of narrative over and over again. And students will draw cliched conclusions. So for example, they'll say, this terrible thing happened to me, but I'm so glad it happened because it made me stronger in this way. That's a classic thing students will say. It seems like the right thing to say.
Right.
Then you're reducing your life to a cliche, ultimately.
Right. Yeah.
I'd rather see someone say, it was actually really hard and I didn't recover from it.
Yeah.
In this particular way. That's more interesting. So an essay shouldn't be cliched in terms of content.
Mm-hmm.
It also shouldn't be cliched in terms of form. And I haven't talked about this, but often students' writing is a bit full of imagery, but not great imagery.
Mm-hmm.
A bit cutesy, a bit sentimental. I'd avoid that writing style. I would rather you have a point that you want to make and make it clearly and directly, but not use image after image where I'm not really even sure what you're saying, but you think that's good writing because that's what you were taught to do.
Right. Yeah.
So that would almost be the most important point, to avoid writing something cliched in terms of content and in terms of form. So yeah.
All right. As we're wrapping up, I know Niall's a more recent college grad. He's probably taking notes on what I should have done for my essay. No, I'm just kidding. Did you have anything that was coming up to you today? Anything jump out at you?
I thought it was very helpful discussion. I'm constantly going through Facebook groups, seeing different people, families asking questions about the essay. So I'm looking forward to sharing this to families.
Nice. I think that, and it was one that I thought about asking earlier, and then it got away from me. And then when you were just talking again, so, and this will be my last question as we're running down on time here, but one I do want to ask. AI, Chat GPT, artificial intelligence. Yeah. Is that going to put you out of business? Or I'm joking, but
it's a good question. I've thought a lot about it. I'm not worried about it. Maybe I'm too much of an optimist, but I think that ChatGPT, at least now for sure, it will write an essay, but it will write a really mediocre essay. And the reason it writes a really mediocre essay is because what you really want, and again, I didn't mention this earlier, but it is critical. When you write an essay, you need to mention your own specific experiences that you've had in life, because you need to give examples. You need to be specific. If you're not specific, then it will just sound like anyone could have written it, or ChatGPT could have written it.
Right.
So I do the ChatGPT test when I'm reading essays, and I'll ask myself, could this have been written by ChatGPT? And And it isn't. Often a student has written it, but it isn't good because they haven't included their specific experiences.
Yeah.
ChatGPT can't do that. It can't describe things that have uniquely happened to you.
Yeah.
The essays all sound, sometimes a student can sound like ChatGPT, but ChatGPT never sound like a student. So I don't think it's possible. Unless something radical happens with AI.
It would have. We had I forget what professor we had on, but it got brought up in conversation, and he said, "There's an easy way I get around my students having, being able to use, chat AI, GPT, all the different concepts is he'll ask a question that's, could hypothetically be answered, but then the follow-up question is, well, how does that make you feel?"
Right.
And right away, it stands out. You cannot have artificial intelligence write an essay about how it makes you feel. And so that's where I'm looking at saying for a college essay, it's about emotion. It's about who you are. I don't know how artificial. I mean, you're right. There would have to be some major advances, or somebody would have to be prompting, ChatGPT for, I would think, a couple years for it to be able to actually write about you. So like truly how you feel about things and your experiences. But I really liked how you put it. You said that students can sound like ChatGPT, but ChatGPT can't sound like a student. I liked how you put that. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
That was a good one. Well, Ben, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for being on. I actually think we should look to get you back on again. Sometime. Once a year, maybe. I would definitely love to keep in touch as we move on. So
I really enjoyed it.
This really was good, and I think I hope parents, and especially a lot of those stressing out over this time of year, get a lot out of today's episode. I know I did. So everyone, thank you so much for listening in. Make sure to join us again next week for yet another episode of College Knowledge. Take care.
Thanks everyone for being a part of College Knowledge, powered by Elite Collegiate Planning. Just as an FYI, we are guaranteeing that you will save money on college by working with ECP. This is a guarantee that you will pay less. Book a free consultation at elitecollegiateplanning.com. Thanks for listening to the College Knowledge Podcast with your hosts, Dave Kozak and Joe Kerins. We hope you enjoyed this week's exploration of higher education, sponsored by the College Planning Network and Paradigm Financial Group. That's all for this episode. See you next time.